and in today's second installation of Perfume 101, we'll be talking about the different fragrance families. Now, to start with, I'm going to briefly just mention the fragrance wheel, and that was created by Michael Edwards in, I want to say 1983, but it was like the early 80s when he created this wheel. And I'll go ahead and put a picture right here of what that wheel looks like. But that fragrance wheel was basically created to help, especially salespeople, to be able to classify a fragrance based on its notes and how it smells. In the fragrance wheel, you have four categories. You have fresh, floral, oriental, and woody. Now, looking at the wheel, you might say to yourself, what about gourmands? Well, there are definitely some outliers that don't really fall within the fragrance wheel, and I'm going to talk about those today as well. To make this a little more interesting, I'm going to show you examples from my collection of these different fragrance families, and I'm going to begin with the four families that are represented on that fragrance wheel. So let's start with floral. Now, florals, of course, have floral notes. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to see things like rose, jasmine, which are two of the most popular notes, period, but especially within florals. You also have iris, tuberose is a really popular one, ylang ylang, orange blossom, gardenia. There's basically all these different floral notes, right? Now, in the past, there were some single note floral fragrances called soli florals, I think is what they were called, or soli flore. And that isn't really popular anymore. You don't really see like a fragrance that's simply just the note of rose, for example, although I'm sure you can find one. Now we see them blended with other things. So you might have a fruity floral, a fresh floral, you could have a woody floral, you could have lots of different versions. Now, because florals are a really popular category, in fact, I believe they're the most popular perfume category, I had a lot in my collection to choose from, but I decided to show you guys this one. This is Woman by Ralph Lauren, and this particular fragrance has a prominent note of tuberose as well as orange blossom. I also pick up pear in this a little bit and black currant, so this does have a little bit of a fruitiness to it, but this is a pretty traditional type of floral fragrance because that tuberose and orange blossom are really predominant in here. So again, that's Ralph Lauren's Woman. The next fragrance family is Orientals, and these types of fragrances are heavy with spices, incense, resins, musks. They also might be blended with things like vanilla, heliotrope, orris root, lots of other like wood, sandalwood, things of that nature. So for this one, as an example, I'm going to show you my bottle of Kenzo Jungle L'Elephant. And this particular fragrance is probably the most clearly Oriental fragrance that I own. I do like Oriental notes, like when you think about the typical notes that you see. But I would say in general, I don't have a ton in my collection that is straight up sort of an Oriental style fragrance. So this one is definitely one of those. And the reason why this one is such a great example of an Oriental is because it has notes of cardamom, caraway, anise, cloves, vanilla is in here. So this is just a really classic sort of representation of the Oriental category. Now, I do want to quickly mention the sort of subcategory of Florientals here, even though it's not on the wheel, and in many cases people aren't going to classify this as its own separate family. However, I think that this particular sort of mesh between florals and Orientals have become so popular that you hear that term Floriental thrown around a lot. So basically all that is a combination of the floral notes and then also the spices or incense, things like that that you would see in Oriental fragrances. A great example of a Floriental from my collection is this one here from Amouage. This is called Lyric Woman. The reason why Lyric Woman is such a great example is because you do have floral notes like rose and ylang ylang, but you also have things like incense, cardamom, and sandalwood, which gives it that Oriental sort of feel to it. So again, great representation of that sub-style. The next family on the fragrance wheel is the woody category. And woody fragrances, again, it's sort of like florals. It kind of tells you what's in it. You're looking for things that are heavy with sandalwood, gaiac wood, cedar, oud, basically all these different types of woods. And I will say that oftentimes you will find woody fragrances that also have things like patchouli or vetiver in them, which are not woods themselves, but do have that earthiness that some woods sort of do. So they kind of go well with that. So a lot of times woody fragrances will have those notes as well. Now, I don't think I have a straight up woody fragrance in my collection. Something like a Le Labo Santal 33 would be a good representation of just like, it's kind of a sandalwood fragrance, right? But I do have one that I would consider sort of an aromatic woody fragrance. And this one is from Initio, and it's called Rehab. And in this fragrance, you not only have Gaiac wood, cedarwood, and sandalwood, you also have patchouli, as well as some bergamot in there and lavender, which gives it that sort of aromatic feel. So this is a really unique fragrance, especially within my collection. I don't think I've smelled anything quite like it before. So I really enjoyed this one, but I do think it's a fairly good representation of the woody category, or at least a subcategory within that family. The last family on the fragrance wheel is the fresh family. And within this sort of group, you have things like citruses, you will have your aquatics, and then also a lot of clean sort of smelling scents, things that might have like white musks or sort of a soapy type of feel to them. Now, I have a really great example of a citrus freshie, and this one comes from Guerlain. It is their Limon Verde, which comes from the Aqua Allegoria collection. And this collection in general has a lot of fresh fragrances. In fact, I would say all of them to some extent are freshies because they are really light. They have a lot of citruses in them. Some are more floral and some have some fruitiness to them, but in general, they all tend to have these citruses. And I believe they're all, eau de toilette concentration. Now, Limon Verde has, of course, a note of lime, but also there is orange in there. And what I find really interesting is that there's an accord of caipirinha, which is a cocktail that I used to make when I bartended. And in that you have cachaça, which is sort of like rum, like a white rum sort of. And then it's mixed with lime and sugar. So again, you see the lime there. So this is a nice, really fresh fragrance. I believe in the dry down, there's some tonka in this one, but it still stays really nice and fresh and citrusy throughout the wear. I was actually pretty impressed with how long this lasted because being at the low concentration that it's at and being a fresh citrus fragrance, I expected maybe 2 hours of wear, but I think I got 4 out of this. So pretty decent for a freshie. All right, next we're gonna talk about some of the outliers from the fragrance wheel. And the first one I'm gonna start with is one that I don't have a great example of because it's not one of my favorite families, and that is the Chypre category. Now, Chypre in French means cypress, not like the tree, but the location. So the 4 main notes in Chypres are going to be representative of Cyprus, the location. And so you're gonna see things like bergamot, patchouli, oak moss, and labdanum. I have such a hard time saying that fast. Labdanum, can't do it. Anyway, so those are the 4 notes that will be in a classic Chypre, but of course there can be additions of lots of other notes, and there pretty much always are. Now, like I said, I don't have a great representation of a Chypre in my personal collection, but I would say the one that I've smelled that is just a truly classic Chypre is Guerlain's Mitsuko. But that one is got all of those 4 notes that are supposed to be there. I think it's one of the like most true to form Chypre fragrances. So if you're interested in that, you can check that one out. I appreciate that scent, but it is not one that I would wear myself. I don't dislike it though, just to put it that way. Now, the closest thing I have to a Chypre in my collection is one from Bottega Veneta, and the name of the fragrance is also Bottega Veneta. This one, although it has a main note of suede, so I might actually put this in a category that I'll talk about later, it does have oak moss, patchouli, and bergamot. It, however, is missing the labdanum. Labdanum, got it. Anyway, so I really do think this is a beautiful fragrance, but it's really not a true Chypre. So that's the closest thing I have, not a category that I'm super in love with. The next family I want to talk about is another classic one, just like the Chypres, and this is the category of Fougere. And Fougeres to me are sort of classic barbershop fragrances. They also, for the most part, tend to lean masculine. So it doesn't mean that women can't wear them. It doesn't mean that there aren't some female Fougeres out there or unisex ones. There are. It's just that the majority of them are aimed to be more masculine. And that's because you're gonna see notes like lavender, which is traditionally masculine, although I have several lavender fragrances that are not super masculine. They're more unisex and they're beautiful. And in fact, I have a couple that are pretty feminine. You also have coumarin, oak moss, and then a lot of like herbaceous or woody notes added to Fougeres as well. Now, if you thought the last category was bad in terms of what I had to show you, this one is worse because All I have that I could find anywhere is this teeny tiny little sample of Replica's At The Barbers. And again, like I said, when I think Fougeres, I kind of think of traditionally barbershop style fragrances. It doesn't mean they all smell like that, but this one is like a modern sort of take on a Fougere, I think. There's definitely the lavender and oak moss that you would see in most Fougeres in At The Barbers, but there is also some basil, which is an interesting note, as well as some white musks that give it sort of a soapy clean feel. All right, I have two families left I want to talk about, and the first one is another one that I think a lot of people associate with masculinity. However, there are tons of beautiful female and unisex fragrances in this category, of which I have multiple, and in fact, this one could fall under here, and that is the category of leather. Now, I don't know that everybody would recognize leather as its own sort of family or category, but they, again, are really popular, especially lately. Tom Ford's ombre leather I used to have, and it's a really nice one, but my current favorite leather fragrance is from Guerlain, and this one is Cuir Beluga. Or if you translate that into English, it means weird whale. No, that's not true. Cuir means leather, and I don't know what beluga means in French. Maybe it just is referring to the whale. Who knows? So in this fragrance, the main two notes that I get that are so beautiful together are vanilla and suede. And I mean, this is a truly beautiful fragrance. It's not a beast mode style fragrance. It's gonna sit closer to the skin, but it's so warm and just, it's sexy in its own way. But yeah, so you get vanilla and you get that suede, or, you know, the soft leather notes. And then also there's some heliotrope in here, I believe some amber, and perhaps some aldehydes as well. But the vanilla and the suede are the stars here, and this is just a truly, truly beautiful fragrance that is completely unisex. So if you identify as a woman, a man, or anything in between or beyond those categories, this will smell amazing. The last family I want to talk about is my favorite. I saved the best for last, at least in my opinion. This is the family of Gourmands, and I love Gourmands. I had so many to choose from in my collection, but basically Gourmands are anything that sort of have an edible smell to it. However, I would say that Gourmands typically, when they're classified as gourmand, have the sweeter or bakery style type of notes. Obviously fruits are edible, but then we tend to kind of classify a lot of fruity fragrances in other places. Doesn't mean they can't be gourmand, but they tend to be like a fruity floral or a fruity woody fragrance or something like that. So some really common notes that you'll see in Gourmands are things like caramel, vanilla, sugar, milk. You'll see things like cognac or different kinds of liqueurs. You might see coffee notes, you might see chocolate, and then again, you might see some fruits in here as well, but a lot of times you'll have those sweet or maybe a bakery type of note that's really driving that gourmand fragrance. And like I said, Gourmands are my favorite because I want to smell edible, I want to smell delicious, and one of my most delicious fragrances that I have is from Xerjoff Casamorati, and this one is Lira. And you may have heard about this before. It's another niche fragrance, as several of these have been, but I feel like it's a fairly popular one in terms of niche fragrances, and for very, very good reason. This is my favorite, although it's close, but this is my favorite Xerjoff that I've smelled thus far, and I've smelled several. This one has notes of caramel, blood orange, vanilla, licorice, cinnamon, and all kinds of delicious things. Now, I know some people get nervous about the licorice, but it's not super strong, so I think that you would still really find this fragrance enjoyable. This is just a truly edible fragrance, and honestly, I think the blood orange pulls a little lemony to me. So if you like orange or lemon, you'll probably kind of enjoy this as well. Again, just a truly beautiful gourmand, great representation. However, because this is my favorite category, I have a lot of gourmand fragrances in my collection. All right, so those are all of the different fragrance families that I want to talk about. I'm sure that some people could come up with some additional sort of families or categories that I haven't talked about. And of course, there are tons and tons of subcategories. Like I said, you can take components of each and mix them together to get all different types of fragrances. However, these are the main ones. And hopefully by going through some of the notes that are commonly found in these different fragrance families, it will help you to be able to better understand what type of fragrance you're getting when you see it listed as a Chypre or when you see it listed as a Fougere, for example. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. If so, please give it a thumbs up if you learned even just one thing. And consider subscribing if you haven't already. I will be continuing to do some of these educational videos, and like I mentioned last time, I'm going to try to get more specific as I go and also incorporate things that you asked to learn about within them. This was one that was requested several times, so I figured I'd do this next, and also because it kind of is just slightly more specific than what we did last time. If you didn't watch that last video, I will leave that linked in the description box, but otherwise, I really appreciate you guys watching this one. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.